Prince Harry is staring into an abyss, and I mean that in every concrete, measurable sense. But we are going through every document, every accusation, every legal trap this man has walked into with his eyes fully open, because this story stopped being about a failing marriage.
Prince Harry's legal team is now facing a storm that few within royal circles anticipated, as explosive forgery claims emerge alongside the shocking seizure of $8.3 million. What once appeared to be a tightly managed legal battle is rapidly unraveling into something far more complex, drawing attention to documents, decisions, and quiet tensions long kept behind closed doors. Insiders suggest this development could redefine more than just a case. It may alter reputations and alliances. So, how did this high-stakes defense turn into a crisis no one saw coming? The unraveling of a prince. Decisions that echo too loudly. As of March 19, 2026, Prince Harry stands at a crossroads that feels less like a turning point and more like a quiet collapse unfolding in real time. The silence surrounding him is almost as striking as the storm itself. Financial pressure mounting, legal shadows stretching wider, and a public narrative that no longer feels fully in his control. For years, the spotlight painted him as a figure of courage and defiance, but that image now flickers against a far more complicated reality. Behind the polished interviews and carefully managed appearances lies a trail of decisions that seem, in hindsight, painfully avoidable. This is no longer a story centered on strained relationships or royal disagreements. It has evolved into something heavier, something tied to accountability and consequence. Reports suggest staggering legal expenses figures climbing toward $50 million spent in battles that promised clarity, but instead deepened uncertainty. Each case, each claim, appears to have added another layer to a situation that now feels dangerously close to spiraling beyond control. To understand how things reached this point, one must look back, though not in a straight line. The year 2018 stands out, not as a beginning, but as a defining moment. It was then that Harry chose to marry Meghan Markle without a prenuptial agreement, a decision rooted in trust, belief, and perhaps a desire to do things differently from the past he had witnessed. It was a choice that spoke of confidence in love, but also one that quietly removed any financial safeguards a man in his position might have been expected to consider. What makes this decision more striking is the history that came before it. Harry had grown up observing the deeply public breakdown of his parents' marriage, a chapter that reshaped not only a family, but an entire institution. The lessons were there, visible and undeniable, yet they seemed to hold little influence over the path he chose. Instead, he embraced a future built on certainty that, over time, has begun to show cracks. Now, as legal questions intensify and financial strains tighten, the consequences of those earlier choices appear to be converging all at once. The allies who once stood close seem distant, and the safety nets that might have softened the fall are nowhere in sight. What remains is a man facing the full weight of his own decisions, in a moment where every move forward feels uncertain, and every step back offers no refuge. By 2020, subtle moves behind closed doors in California were already reshaping power and control. How did a quietly signed document give Meghan Markle unprecedented influence over Archewell? And what consequences would this early decision have for the future of shared ventures and the royal brand? The unseen signatures, power, control, and a legal storm. The first signs were easy to miss, buried beneath headlines and carefully managed appearances. But by 2020, a quiet shift had already taken place behind closed doors in California. As a new life was being built and a global brand was taking shape, a document rarely discussed publicly was quietly signed during the early formation of Archewell. It was not dramatic at the time, not something that drew attention, yet its impact would echo far into the future. Control over shared ventures, intellectual property, and financial direction reportedly moved in one decisive stroke, settling largely in Meghan's hands. What makes that moment striking is not just the outcome, but the contrast. This was a man known for his relentless legal pursuits, someone who would challenge media institutions over stories published more than a decade earlier, dissecting every detail with determination. Yet here, in a decision that shaped his commercial future, that same caution appeared absent. There were no drawn-out negotiations, no visible resistance, only a signature on a document that would later raise more questions than answers. The pattern, however, becomes clearer when placed beside earlier events. Years before, during the end of Meghan's first marriage, the process had been markedly different, carefully negotiated, meticulously reviewed, and executed with precision. Nothing was left to chance. Every clause was examined, every outcome controlled. Seen this way, the California Agreement no longer feels like an isolated decision, but part of a broader, consistent approach. Now, as of early 2026, the situation has taken a far more serious turn. A high-stakes legal battle against associated newspapers, with estimated costs reaching $50 million, was already drawing global attention. But just days before proceedings were set to begin, the narrative shifted dramatically. Allegations surfaced, not from opposing counsel, but from within Harry's own legal circle. Claims of financial inducements, manipulated evidence, and most alarmingly, forgery began to emerge. At the center of it all stood a key witness who suddenly withdrew his support, stating that his signature had been used without consent and that the statement attributed to him was entirely false. He described pressure in the days leading up to the trial, adding a layer of unease to an already volatile situation. If even a fraction of these claims holds weight, the consequences extend far beyond reputational damage. What began as a civil dispute risks crossing into far more serious territory, where questions of accountability are no longer measured in financial loss, but in legal responsibility. Prince Harry faced a legal storm, yet the real tension ran deeper into the private collapse of his marriage. How did personal struggles intertwine with public battles, and could the strains with Meghan Markle truly push their relationship toward an unavoidable breaking point in early 2026? The crisis closing in on Harry. What makes this moment so striking is not just the legal storm forming around Prince Harry, but how deeply it overlaps with the quiet collapse of his personal life. Behind the headlines and courtroom tension, something far more intimate is unfolding, something that cannot be settled by lawyers or public statements. As of early 2026, multiple insiders suggest that the strain inside his marriage to Meghan Markle has reached a breaking point, with divorce no longer whispered as speculation, but discussed as an approaching reality. At the center of this widening divide lies a single immovable question: whether to return to the United Kingdom. For Harry, the answer feels urgent, almost unavoidable. With concerns growing around the health of King Charles III, the pull toward home has become stronger than ever. It is no longer just about geography. It is about time, legacy, and the fragile chance to rebuild a relationship that has been strained for years. The distance that once symbolized independence now feels like a barrier he may not be able to afford. Yet for Meghan, that same place represents something entirely different. The United Kingdom is tied, in her view, to some of the most difficult chapters of her life experiences she has no intention of revisiting. Sources close to the situation describe her stance as firm and unyielding. Returning is not an option. Taking their children back is not open for discussion. Even engaging in the conversation has reportedly become a source of tension, turning private disagreements into emotionally charged confrontations. This clash of perspectives has created more than just a marital rift. It has begun to ripple outward, affecting decisions, finances, and the future they once carefully built together. While Harry's legal challenges, reportedly tied to the conduct of his professional team and a strategy said to involve tens of millions of dollars, continue to draw scrutiny, the instability at home adds a layer of unpredictability that cannot be ignored. By mid-2026, what once appeared to be a united front is now marked by distance, both physical and emotional. The question is no longer whether pressure exists, but whether anything remains strong enough to withstand it. California's community property laws may seem straightforward, yet they carry hidden power that can upend even the strongest unions. How could a rule so simple now cast a shadow over a marriage once thought unbreakable, and what unforeseen consequences might this legal truth unleash? The silent math behind a royal fortune. California is a community property state, and that single fact carries a quiet weight that few truly grasp until it begins to unfold in real time. Beneath its calm legal language lies a simple, unyielding rule. What is built within a marriage is divided equally, no matter whose name appears on paper or who earned it. In this case, that rule now casts a long shadow over a union once seen as unshakable. By early 2026, whispers around Montecito had grown louder, not because of sudden conflict, but because of patterns that seemed carefully laid years earlier. Around 2022, subtle decisions began to take shape that, when viewed alone, appeared harmless, even practical. But together, they told a far more calculated story. Independent brand structures emerged. Business registrations carried a single name. Media deals, from streaming platforms to podcast ventures, followed the same design: precise, consistent, and notably separate. The numbers involved are far from small. The reported $8.3 million tied to the Archewell Foundation is only one piece of a much larger financial landscape. Streaming agreements, publishing advances, and sprawling real estate holdings in California all fall under the same legal lens. The Montecito mansion itself, often portrayed as a symbol of new beginnings, now becomes part of a different equation, one defined not by sentiment, but by division. What makes the situation more striking is the absence of early safeguards. No prenuptial agreement stands between personal inheritance and shared property. Assets once thought to be individually protected, such as long-standing family wealth, may no longer be entirely separate if they were blended into marital life over time. In legal terms, even legacy can become negotiable. Financial experts often describe such developments as methodical rather than reactive. Establishing personal ventures, maintaining sole ownership of key assets, and building income streams that function independently are all recognized strategies, especially in jurisdictions like California. Over several years, each step appeared to align with that framework, quietly reinforcing a structure that now holds significant consequence. As of March 2026, discussions of separation no longer feel speculative. Instead, they reveal the full weight of decisions made long before any public shift in the relationship. What remains is not just a question of emotional distance, but a precise financial reckoning, one where every asset, every agreement, and every overlooked detail becomes part of an exact calculation. In the end, this is not merely a story about wealth or status. It is about timing, structure, and the silent power of a legal system that does not bend to narrative, only to numbers. California may be far from the palace, but the stakes are no less intense. How will Meghan's team prove stability for Archie and Lilibet amid constant travel, court dates, and a life dictated by duty rather than routine? And what consequences could this legal battle hold? A crown in crisis, wealth, custody, and the shadow of consequence. California is where the stakes quietly sharpen, far from palace walls yet no less unforgiving. Inside its courtrooms, decisions are guided less by status and more by presence. Who showed up, who stayed, who built the rhythm of a child's daily life? And in this unfolding storm, that question hangs heavily. Meghan's legal team is expected to present a clear picture: stability at home with Archie and Lilibet, against a backdrop of constant travel, London court dates, global appearances tied to the Invictus Games, and a schedule shaped more by obligation than routine. But custody is only one piece of a much wider puzzle, and perhaps not even the most dangerous. The deeper concern centers on money, specifically how it moved, where it landed, and whether it crossed a line that cannot be undone. Questions surrounding the Archewell Foundation have been building for months, drawing attention not just from watchdog groups, but from federal authorities. What once seemed like routine scrutiny has begun to carry a sharper edge. The possibility now being whispered is no longer about minor compliance issues. If investigators were to conclude that charitable funds were used in ways that benefited personal interests, the consequences would shift from administrative penalties into something far more serious. In the United States, and particularly under California jurisdiction, financial misconduct tied to nonprofit organizations can escalate quickly into criminal territory. And when signatures appear on official filings, responsibility follows them. What makes the situation more precarious is how these threads connect. Legal uncertainty, public controversy, and financial exposure do not exist in isolation. Each one reinforces the other, shaping how institutions and ultimately judges interpret credibility and risk. If a court sees instability, not just in schedule but in legal standing, it may weigh heavily on decisions that affect family life. There is also the growing question of liability. Mounting legal costs, potential penalties, and reputational damage create a pressure that extends beyond headlines. They influence negotiations, strain alliances, and narrow the space for recovery. And in cases where multiple parties are involved, accountability rarely stops with one individual. What emerges is not a single crisis, but a converging family, finance, and law intersecting at a moment where every choice carries lasting consequences. Prince Harry and Meghan once seemed untouchable, building a life of influence and independence. But how did shared property laws and $13 million anonymous donation thrust their fortunes into scrutiny? And what unforeseen consequences could now redefine their carefully constructed future? The price of shared power. In California, shared property is more than a legal phrase. It is a binding reality where assets and consequences move together. That principle now casts a long, unforgiving shadow over Harry and Meghan, tying their futures in ways neither title nor distance can easily untangle. What once looked like a carefully built life of influence and independence is now being re-examined under a far harsher light. By early 2026, questions had already started to circle, but they gained sharper focus when financial records drew attention to a $13 million anonymous donation. The sum, intended for charitable causes like refugee relief and vaccine access, became the center of a deeper investigation. Authorities were no longer interested in public narratives or personal struggles. They were tracking numbers, signatures, and decisions. And those details pointed to both of them. Harry's position is particularly complex. His role was not distant or symbolic. He was present, listed, and involved. Documents carry his name. Decisions bear his approval. The life he shared, marked by the Montecito estate, private flights, high-level security, and a polished public image, now raises difficult questions about how much of it was quietly supported by funds meant for something else. Claiming ignorance under such circumstances may not hold, especially when responsibility appears to have been shared at every level. The Internal Revenue Service approaches cases like this without sentiment. It does not weigh emotion or personal history. It follows the path of money with precision. And as investigators reconstruct how funds moved, how much reached real programs, and how much remained within operational or personal spending, the gap between intention and reality may become impossible to ignore. If proven, the implications are not only financial but deeply personal. Yet beyond the legal pressure lies a more human story. Reports suggest that while Harry faces mounting scrutiny, financial strain, legal exposure, and growing distance within his marriage, there may be a quiet readiness elsewhere to receive him. It adds a striking layer of tension. A man caught between accountability and belonging, between the life he built and the one he left behind. This unfolding situation carries the weight of consequence, but also the complexity of loyalty, identity, and choice. In the end, it is not just about laws or money. It is about how far shared responsibility can reach and what remains when everything else is stripped away. Inside Buckingham Palace, talks have grown colder, more calculated, focused on outcome rather than feeling. What forces have been quietly shaping this high-stakes settlement? And how will carefully planned moves determine the fate of the crown as tensions edge toward a breaking point? The quiet terms of an inevitable end. Inside Buckingham Palace, conversations have taken on a colder, more deliberate tone, less about emotion, more about outcome. What is unfolding is not sudden, but something long anticipated, carefully mapped behind closed doors. The institution has been studying every turn, every public fracture, and now, as the situation edges toward a breaking point, its response is already in place. At the heart of these discussions lies a settlement designed with precision, generous enough to avoid prolonged conflict, yet firm enough to protect the crown at all costs. Legal language is reportedly being refined to an almost unbreakable standard, ensuring silence is not requested, but enforced. The decision to allow the Duchess of Sussex to remain is not an act of goodwill, but strategy. Removing it would ignite a storm far louder than the palace is willing to face. For years, the path to this moment has been quietly forming. Prince Harry had once stood firmly within the royal structure, but over time, that foundation eroded. Public accusations, deeply personal interviews, and a memoir that unsettled even long-standing loyalties reshaped how he was viewed within the institution. Bridges that once offered stability were not just crossed, they were dismantled. Now, with mounting pressures surrounding finances, legal exposure, and a marriage reportedly nearing its end, his position has shifted dramatically. Returning to the royal fold is no longer a matter of pride, but necessity. Yet without leverage, such a return depends entirely on the terms set by those he once challenged. Beyond palace walls, however, Meghan Markle appears to be moving in a different direction. By March 18, 2026, her trajectory had become increasingly clear. Separate ventures, independent branding, and carefully cultivated opportunities suggest a plan that did not rely on shared outcomes. While much of the public focus remained fixed on royal tensions and legal distractions, she had been quietly building something entirely her own. What makes this moment striking is not the conflict itself, but the contrast in strategy. One side, methodical and unsentimental, is prepared to close the chapter with controlled finality. The other has already begun writing a new one, independent, deliberate, and free from the structures that once defined it. And somewhere between those two paths lies a resolution that will not be shaped by emotion, but by calculation, where silence, survival, and legacy are negotiated behind doors the world will never fully see. Prince Harry's bold moves once seemed like independence, but what hidden consequences were already unfolding? How did decisions from declining a prenuptial agreement to signing key documents quietly leave him exposed, reshaping his control, influence, and the path of his public and private life? The collapse of control, how it all unraveled for Prince Harry. So, let's look closely at where Prince Harry truly stands now, not in rumor, but in consequence. What once appeared to be bold independence has slowly reshaped into a chain of decisions that left little room for protection, foresight, or retreat. Long before the headlines began to sharpen, critical choices had already been made. Declining a prenuptial agreement quietly opened the door to financial vulnerability, while key documents, signed without deep scrutiny, shifted control of branding and influence away from him entirely. By late 2024, concerns that once sounded exaggerated began to take form. Legal shadows grew longer. A charitable foundation tied to his name reportedly drew attention over possible financial misconduct, raising questions that extended beyond reputation into potential legal exposure. At the same time, a lawsuit valued at nearly $50 million began to crumble under serious allegations involving his own legal representation, claims of forgery and witness interference that only deepened the crisis. Then came December, during a public appearance at the Dealbook Summit, where remarks about repeated divorce rumors were delivered with humor. But what seemed like light deflection now reads very differently. Those same words echo against the present reality, where separation is no longer speculation, but an outcome quietly taking shape behind closed doors. What was once dismissed as tabloid exaggeration has begun transforming into formal proceedings and legal documentation. California, once imagined as a fresh start and a haven of independence, now feels more like a place of isolation than opportunity. The life built there, both personal and professional, shows cracks under the weight of mounting pressures. Distance, once liberating, has become a barrier. With his children expected to remain in the United States, the emotional and geographical divide grows ever wider. Financial complications, legal battles, and public scrutiny continue to close in, coming from every direction, leaving little room for reprieve. Yet the most striking development lies in the path that still remains viable. The very institution he chose to step away from years ago now appears to be the only realistic option for stability. But this is no simple return. Any support offered would come with strict, carefully defined conditions, rules designed not for personal comfort, but to protect the monarchy's structure, image, and legacy. What makes this moment so gripping is not just the collapse, but how inevitable it now seems in retrospect. Every decision, every overlooked precaution has quietly paved the way here. What once seemed freedom has instead led to exposure, uncertainty, and a reality far more complex and challenging than anyone could have anticipated. The monarchy has weathered centuries of scandal and upheaval, yet what is happening now centers on Prince Harry in a deeply personal unraveling. How did private palace discussions quietly escalate into a moment of undeniable finality? And what consequences could this unprecedented tension bring to the royal family? A crown that endures, a prince at the edge. The monarchy has faced storms far greater than one fractured marriage, and history makes that clear. From the reign of Henry VIII to the era of Edward VII, and through the turbulent years shaped by Princess Diana and Prince Andrew, the institution has shown an almost unshakable ability to endure. What is unfolding now, however, is not just another chapter in royal history. It is a deeply personal unraveling centered on Prince Harry. By early 2026, quiet discussions behind palace doors had already begun to shift in tone. What once sounded like concern now carries the weight of finality. The belief growing among insiders is not about whether the monarchy will withstand the situation, but whether Harry himself can recover from what lies ahead. His financial position appears strained, his public image fractured, and the life he tried to build outside royal walls seems increasingly unstable. There are predictions, whispered but persistent, that within 90 days a formal divorce filing could emerge, marking a decisive turning point between him and Meghan Markle. Alongside this, reports suggest that legal and financial scrutiny, possibly involving tax authorities, may deepen, raising questions that extend far beyond personal matters. For Harry, this is not just about separation. It is about survival in a world where every move is watched and judged. In another corner of this unfolding story, a potential legal settlement with the Daily Mail looms large. Avoiding a prolonged legal battle may come at a heavy cost, both financially and reputationally. Such a move could close one chapter quickly, but not without leaving lasting marks. It reflects a man trying to limit damage rather than reclaim control. If these paths converge, the image becomes stark. A return to England, possibly alone, living quietly within the boundaries of a royal estate, seems less like speculation and more like a likely outcome. Gone would be the public role, the military honors, and much of the independence he once sought. What remains would be the name one he tried to distance himself from for 6 years, yet one that may ultimately define his future. Meanwhile, Meghan's trajectory appears strikingly different. Holding onto her title, her financial standing, and the children, she may step forward into a new phase, one shaped by independence and control. This is not a simple tale of love lost. It is a complex game of choices, consequences, and timing. And perhaps the most striking truth is this: Harry may never have realized he was part of such a game until it was already being played around him. So, what do you think really triggered the shocking forgery claims and the $8.3 million seizure that's shaking Harry's legal team? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.